Hey everybody, I'm Josh Miramant, the founder and CEO of Blue Orange Digital. Just a little bit about my background. I actually founded Blue Orange back in 2015, but I have a background as I'm founding two data companies prior to Blue Orange Digital. So I've actually been in both sides, both hands-on keyboard and building business in the SaaS space for a couple of venture rounds prior to entering into Blue Orange as starting this company, which focuses on enterprise data management as a professional services firm. So I've been spending a lot of time around data here and seen a lot of cycles, and excited to share kind of the newer areas happening in 2023.
I guess I'll go next since I'm the only person left, right? So again, I'm Gordon Wong. I am a career data warehouse, data platform builder, and team leader. I was not by design, but I pretty much fell into this right at the beginning of my career, and I've done nothing but that since. And there's an interesting split in my career where about half of my time I've been internal to companies, building teams, driving internal initiatives and so on. But the other half of the time I've been in professional services and consulting. And it wasn't really by design, but I feel like that's given me a very interesting perspective of what's happening in the industry, but also being able to go internal and do long-term things where you're both building it and delivering. And my core technical competency is that I'm a SQL geek, right? I've touched every database just about out there, and I continue to be really steeped in that technology. And then Josh and I were just joking that so the formal name of my company is Wong Decision Intelligence. I needed to pick something a few years ago, but I really just prefer going by Wong Decisions.
I love that. And for context, Gordon and I actually randomly met by chance through just a network connection. But this is, I think, of people. I get a lot of time to meet with many people in the data space, but of somebody that I just love and respect to talk to about stuff on both in general on great things like your company name, but in data specifically. Gordon is incredibly well versed and really shares a lot of the values and thoughts that we've had around here at Blue Orange, but it's how I've seen in the space as well. So I'm really excited to share some thoughts and talk a little bit about some of the trends and occurrences in data in general, but things that are happening now in 2023.
Yeah, so let's just jump into it.
Sounds good. Perfect. So just for context, we threw a couple slides together here, mostly to guide our chat. But I think that, I think there's only 5 or 6 slides in total in here. But I think we want to spend a few minutes and just start off that, without reading the slide verbatim. But I think one of the bigger takeaways that we have is, I think 2023, there's a lot of innovative technology and new tooling and really big changes in how we go about the thing, but at the very underlying and foundational core, the goal of data is the same. And I think that's the perfect starting point to think about. So I'll kick over to you, some really good thoughts on this. I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on this, Gordon.
Yeah, I mean, so that was that's what people are here because they want to know, what do they need to know for 2023? And I'm going to argue that if you've been doing your job, you already know what you need to know for 2023, right? You and your teams should be finding how to deliver value for your stakeholders and for your customers. And, and then now, of course, the details change from time to time, but that's really been the name of the game since like the beginning of history, right? We use information, we use data to drive better outcomes. So, modern data teams, we're helping to drive outcomes for other people. So we create potential, right? So how do we go about creating that potential? Well, potential for what? Okay. So it must be potential against something. And hopefully you have a plan, right? So if you're at a company, do you have a North Star metric? How do you, what does your C-suite care about? What do you care about? What do your customers care about, right? These are the things you kind of need to know, right? Because these are the outcomes you want to impact. So if I'm an education tech company, I'm going to think about how do I educate as many people as possible in the skills they're looking for, right? If I'm a healthcare company, we're looking for better health outcomes. So again, it goes back to like understanding what the outcomes are and then figuring out how to remove the constraints to get knowledge to those people trying to make decisions. And that's the same in 2023 as it was last year and the year before and, in my entire career. And I think it will be the same for a long time going forward. But of course, we're going to delve into some of the details here.
Yeah, I think it dovetails so nicely with patterns that I see in the space when I look at a lot of, we're definitely going to dive into some details and dive into kind of the technical transitions that help enable that core underlying goal. But I look at a lot of the trends that have occurred and we we can even define maybe further the modern data stack and the cloud transformation and the advent of on-prem. These are all absolutely going after the exact same problem. There's actually even, we'll get a chance to talk hopefully a little bit more on kind of how we structure data teams. And there's really been an ebb and flow and truly like cyclation that's occurred in centralized, decentralization, centralization again, like because of different enablement in there. But a lot of what we're solving is it's the same core fundamental problem, but it's going after it in different ways potentially, or little different technique flavors to it. So I think it's a really good point to remember that, the core underlying principle of everything we're about to talk to is still making sure that you have that core user empathy, what you're trying to get downstream, what the goals are. I think that North Star metric is really key. Also one of the things I always admired, you always talked about is like practicing what you teach as data teams too, being analytical as an analytics team, I think is a really cool practice, which I'm sure we'll dive into as well. So a really great point. The only other thing that I just wanted to flag is one other topic that excites me a lot on, I think, thinking about what is really changing, or the couple of those are changing fundamentally, are, the big thing that's happening, it's not unique to 2023, but in the last couple of years of data, is just the ability to work with very large sets of data much easier. And I think that's a lot of what the modern data tool stack, or a lot of tools that are available are working on. And at a little higher level, there's this book that I recommend everybody read, Prediction Machines, by a great group of professors out of Toronto, University of Toronto, but they really focus on the economics of machine learning. And they simply, I was going to say, I knew it wouldn't go far. And they just actually came out with a new book too, Power Prediction, which I think takes it to that next level of the decision feedback loop. But reducing down a simple TLDR that I really love from what they present is thinking about how, as the cost of prediction gets cheaper, which is really what we're dealing with large sets of data, analytics, and ML, machine learning, many problems are able to be converted into prediction problems. It becomes more ubiquitous to use, and the value of analysis, the actual value of judgment goes up, the value of data goes up, and the supporting components to that decision process. So we'll talk a lot about the how with the tools and the teams and design for this year, but I do think that conversion, the decreasing cost of prediction, becoming ubiquitous and used across the companies and making decisions as a fundamental decision process, has driven up the value for how we think about the application of tools and make decisions as companies. So, okay, let's maybe move on to the next slide, unless there are other points on that area, Gordon.
And I want to bring up one more quick thing about that, since you brought up predictions, really, right? And then sure. One thing that is different, I think, about 2023 versus maybe perhaps the previous year is the window of return, the investment window, right? Whenever we talk about ROI, we're always talking about time, whether we realize it or not, whether it be your stock portfolio or your education or what have you, right? So I think it's very fair to say that for 2023, many of us are experiencing the window of return, the expected window of return has shrunken. We need to deliver more value more quickly, right? Or maybe our stakeholders are tired of waiting. And and that fits the general life cycle of investments, right? Sometimes if you tell me I have 5 years to do something, then maybe I invest more heavily into infrastructure, or I'm looking for a long-term compound interest, right? But if I have to deliver something in 4 weeks, I'm probably not going to do a lot of heavy infrastructure, right? I'm going to be thinking about like what are the shortcuts, what's the MVP, so on. So they drive really different strategies. So I think that is true for 2023. We have to be aware that the window of investment, or the window of return, the expectations on us are shorter than they were in previous years. So maybe fewer optional projects, right?
And that's a great point. Two things I would note in there. One thing I really always appreciate, Gordon, I've had a chance to talk about this a few times before about how we attack data problems. And one thing that, Gordon always does a great job of thinking about from the outset is really the economics of the investment of a data problem. I've seen him do that in practice, but also how he always talks about this as one of those, not only what you're looking for the outcome, but how are you justifying that? One thing I will say that you're seeing with the advent of a number of things, like even structural pieces about how you design data problems now, is identifying not only the speed to ROI, but the identifying the ability to analyze the efficacy of problems and use data to analyze data projects in themselves has become easier. The rise of observability tools we'll talk about, the actual analysis or the ability to work with data much easier now. And these are the things that have been introduced in the new tools and some of the modern data tools that are helping us get that speed to process. And then there's other stuff that are just fundamental shifts, like we'll talk this later, like models as a service, which are very, very kind of forward-thinking, advanced pre-trained models that are available at the click of a button with a lot of automation around it as well.
Yeah, so Josh, you just threw me a softball, right? So it's, one of the best practices of engineering managers is people always suggest that, if you're a former software engineer turned engineering manager, you should always continue to code. Maybe not production code, but you should keep your hands in the game, right? Well, I'm going to argue that for every analytics manager and really every manager, you should also continue to analyze, right? You are an analyst because you're trusted with assets and you're expected to give a positive ROI to your organization or your company. And if you're not doing analysis, then how are you going to be purposeful about this, right? And so, and every analysis is almost, frequently analysis is just some ratio over time, right? So in this case, if we're looking at ROI, it's value over cost over time, right? And then so if I'm going to measure the ROI of my data platform, my efforts and so on, I need to understand the value and I need to understand the costs. And that's what I think about when I think about data economics and so on. This is what I've done as a manager, right? If I think my ROI is good, I'm going to find a way to communicate that to my stakeholders and brag about it and say, hey, you should give me more people because I'm giving you a positive return, right? And if I'm failing to do that, I still need to be able to communicate that and figure out how am I going to improve the ROI, right? You really don't want someone else to measure your ROI for you. That's a bad place.
Such a great point. Yeah. So let's dive in. I think it couldn't be more present, but diving in, I think this will segue very well. I think we've been talking around this, but just starting to get next level down. So we have this term, which is up your data literacy, but the best way to utilize your data. So I think utilization in that place. So yes.
Sorry, we're going to interrupt you for just a moment because we want to push out a poll that would help influence what Gordon and you are going to be speaking about specific to data literacy. So folks, we're pushing out our first poll. Please, we'd be grateful if you could answer. Great, we'll just leave that up for a few seconds. All right, we have some great results coming in. We're just going to shut down the poll in the next couple seconds and share the results. All right, here are the results. Everyone can see them. Josh and Gordon, this hopefully will help direct the conversation a bit. Please take it away.
Perfect. Yeah, really appreciate everyone giving a little feedback. I think we have a nice even distribution curve here. Nice parabola that exists across the poll results. I love that. Ranging from no data literacy to 5, but as common found in our practice, because we work with a lot of different enterprise and enterprise clients, very common. There's a range that exists from pure expertise all the way to no data literacy, but I think our distribution falls pretty heavily, about 50% right in the middle. So that's good. We'll make sure we focus on that idea of certainly being aware, but then also talk to a couple of areas on the side. But yeah, so just picking back up, I think it's really helpful. Thanks for the results there. Just on the idea of best ways to utilize data in 2023. So maybe I'll kick that over to you, Gordon.
Yeah, sure. So I have to warn you, I have my undergraduate background is psychology and philosophy, right? So I immediately start thinking about what do we really mean by data literacy here? So this is very useful information. I see that, okay, so we have this relatively even distribution, but it still doesn't tell me, do my users know enough to use the products I'm generating for them? And that's the question I really need to understand, right? And tying in the theory of constraints, are they blocked, right? So are they blocked? So if I was going to, do this poll internally in my own company, and you should do this poll, I would ask people, do you have the information necessary to use the products we're generating, right? Do you have the information necessary to make decisions? What skills do you feel like you're missing or lacking to make better decisions, right? Those are the things I want to understand, because, we're going to throw in the term self-service. Josh and I were talking about this earlier. We both dislike this term, self-service BI, because we feel like there's an application of responsibility frequently with self-service. Let's make it a user's problem because it's too hard to figure out. I don't want to make it a user's problem, because then if the user fails, I fail, and I had no control over it. What I want to do is partner with the user. And in order to partner with the user, I need to know more about their constraints. I need to know their needs, and I need to know their problems. I need to know the constraints, so I could be a good partner and help them get better education or do things for them or what have you, right? And so I think we need to go deeper on what it means for data literacy. And then there are some great tools out there, right? There's some great tools that help us data literacy. I'm going to throw Atlan out there just to mention them, because they're, friends of mine. I'm big fans of them. Great data catalog. Why I like that, call that product out in particular, is they focus a lot on the user experience, right? So they're building from the user experience. But again, we need to know, how are people blocked, right?
I love the term. I think this is a more recent term, last few years, but of data literacy, and deriving, when we talk about literate, like using the analogy with linguistics or language, like data as a language, it's thinking that analogy stands. Like if you learn a foreign language or a different language, just speaking that language the best you can doesn't mean other people understand that language. Even if you learn it as great as possible, even if you're the smartest data scientist in the world in this analogy, still doesn't mean that's interpretable or adoptable in an organization. So this idea of everybody becoming linguistically trained in this, as example, makes it much easier to translate. I think there's extending this analogy maybe too far. You have that idea of like low code or BI tools are good translation functions. So it's allow you to simplify how you get to that insight. But there is still deeper than just, and tying in what you're saying, Gordon, deeper than just having great data infrastructure and having the excellent tools and everything stood up. There is still just the innate understanding of what are you analyzing? What are the, understanding the foundations of statistics and understanding the counterintuitive traps and how you think about a problem with a data mindset. That literacy component has been I've been glad that has been the narrative that's been emerging recently, because it isn't just a data team isn't the only one that drives effective adopted analytics. And we've been seeing this too with the rise of the analytics engineer as a role. I think that's a huge emergent in the last, that role didn't really exist. It was very much so data engineers kind of threw things over to data analysts and data scientists, and then they would usually output in a way that would get downstream in an organization. This analytics engineer, and even being more embedded across organizations, has been really a new process for allowing tighter feedback of educating business units and educating the business side of the house of how to think with data. And I think that percolation is really having big effects of having that fluency across organizations as a whole. So.
And let's push some practical tips out there, because I think our users, our listeners do want to hear this, right? So, literacy, like any kind of knowledge problem, starts with foundations, right? So we do if you don't document your basic building blocks, right? What was the source column? What's the source system? How are you going to know it's safe to use later on, right? And if you're deriving columns, right, you need to be able to explain how that derivation was done, because there's limits to this derivation and how it should be used. There's an expression I like where I say, we say language before analysis, right? Anyone ever go to a meeting where people threw a bunch of 3-letter acronyms at you and said, aren't you expected to just understand this? You can't, if you go to a marketing conversation, and you should make sure your users understand what CAC is and LTV and so on and so on before you start telling them what to do, right? So language before analysis, make sure you bring your users along. Also, send the knowledge to the activity. Don't go the other way around, right? So your definitions, your access to education should be right there at the fingertips of your users, in the dashboard, in the report, in your presentation, what have you, right? Don't make them go hunt down this information, because they won't do it. They don't have time, right? And you're not serving them well in that case, right? It's a bad experience. So send the knowledge to the activity, and make sure you take care of language before analysis.
Yeah, great points. I think just on time, it might be good to move on to the next steps. I have a couple more points, but we'll probably get back to them in trends. So I'll step on here to talking about data observability, because this ties into utilization, but we'll just kick off on advances in data observability and how it can benefit your team. Observability is actually kind of I'll start maybe a little definition here, just because I feel like it's warranted. Relatively newer in the term. I think they're sitting next to governance, and there's some differentiation between the two. But at its core, I think first off, data observability is really, this is a critical time. Huge amounts of investment in the space, number of products that are coming out. But at its core, data observability is just the focus of understanding, diagnosing, and managing data across all of the ecosystem, the tooling, and the kind of life cycle of it. So, they're tied into governance, but has a couple different areas of differentiation. But Gordon, maybe you want to kick off talking about a few of the areas of seeing how observability has been kind of helping and aiding in more effective adoption of good data infrastructure at companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a really exciting trend, right? And I think why it's exciting to me is that as a practitioner in this space, I'm finally getting some help in building the machine that builds the analytics, right? So we come into this, we're thinking, I'm an analyst or I'm an analytics engineer, and I think that my main job is producing these dashboards and reports and this analysis and so on. Well, the development of these things, of course, is lengthy and it takes a lot of skill, but really the continuous delivery of these things is where all the value is, right? At the moment you finish a dashboard or a report or a model, what have you, you may be pretty proud of yourself, but you actually haven't created any value yet. It's not till that continuous delivery of knowledge and people are using it and taking actions that you're generating value. And that, so that I think has to be in production. But observing the production machine has always been hard, right? And then so we're always running our own tools and creating our own dashboards and observing ourselves and coming up with new language. And so I think the advances of data observability really can help teams to go back to working on their subject matter expertise and then analysis, as opposed to having to roll all their own tooling to observe themselves. And then, and they start bringing in standard language, the big players like Monte Carlo, Metaplane, and Datafold, and so on. Part of what they bring with their product is they bring a language to describe data observability. This is really helpful. Back to our expression, language before analysis, right? How am I going to talk about how well my warehouse is doing, my pipelines are doing, if I don't have language to describe these things? What is a pipeline anyway, right? So having these things defined and then being able to build analysis on it is super helpful. So, of course, like I'm sure everyone who's run a team has, had a well-meaning sprint, they were going to build all these features, and then it turns out at the end of the sprint, 80% of the time got consumed with fixing production bugs. No one planned for that, right? Now, the new tooling coming out, the tooling is coming out from, again, like people like Monte Carlo, Metaplane, and so on and so on. It's not going to eliminate all of this, but it's going to make it easier for sure. For sure. And again, going back to standard language and built-in products and integration with your systems, like integration with Slack and so on, helping you understand where the signal is. I don't need to see 50 graphs telling me that everything's fine. I just want to know the outlier. What's broken, right? And it's fun, if I can get that from somebody else, I can go back to doing my core function, all the better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. And as you always bring this back to the value to end user, which is such a core thing to remember in here. I think one of those, what you said up front really resonates where, observability tools are, what I'm so excited about them is it's equipping the data infrastructure with the ability to control, kind of make sense of the complexity of those systems, and obviously making that then something that can be more extensible out to other parts of the parts of the company. But one of the things that we've been seeing with the advent of, I think the component of observability is just actually using more automation to make it easier to get some of these benefits. I think that's one of the things that I think is the catalyst in 2023. But at the core of it, it's the observability integrations, stuff like monitoring and metadata indexing, and just the ability to have more automated scope and detectability across all of your data. It gets you into a more metrics-driven analysis of your data system. So times to reduce the mean time to identify, or mean time to acknowledge problems that come in with data, time to resolve. You can actually start bringing, these are now becoming metrics that you can define against issues. Because I think one of the areas that, Gordon, to what you were saying before, where it's a lot of work to get to that first report, but until you derive value, that's hard. But then once you're driving value, that's a stale report. So how do you make sure it's accurate, up to date, fresh? There's the quality of the data is accurate. You change business logic, so you need lineage in that transition piece. Like, how is all that tracked and monitored? This is what the suite of observability tools with a more automated fashion that's coming out with a lot of these tools gives a modern data practitioner a complete new tool set to ensure that they're able to keep up with the kind of growing demands once this becomes adopted internally. Because the core of a lot of where problems fall down in the past, projects have fallen down in the past are, static nature of data, lack of freshness, not driving adopter value, knowing where business logic is lacking. That's a lot of what we're able to kind of uncover and maintain a lot easier with some of these systems.
Yeah, I mean, tying it back to our subject line about like, what do data teams need to know for 2023? You need to know yourself. That's one of them, right? And you need to know yourself so that you can deliver value. And observability is one of those things. It helps you understand yourself. You being a manager, if you're a manager or anyone on the team, you being an analyst is going to help you know yourself, right? So being able to talk about what is the SLA for my data warehouse? So what time of day or what type of lag can I tolerate to stay within the production envelope so that my users are unblocked? And being able to understand when you're not hitting those expectations, and being able to understand how things have changed over time, whether you're improving or not, critically important, and I certainly like walking into my boss's office and say, hey, we used to miss the SLA by 75% of the time, and now we're hitting it 99% of the time. That's a really good story to have, right? And you can't really do that until you go do some definitions, right? And I think so. I really strongly encourage you. I mean, as data teams, shouldn't we be using data, right? Shouldn't we be measuring ourselves?
Absolutely. Let's advance to the next slide and pause if we might have a poll here as well.
Coming up.
Yeah.
We're still good. You guys are killing it.
Excellent. Okay. Well, this is a topic I'm very excited about. So just data-driven decision-making, the economics of data teams. So I think there's two areas I think we want to talk to in here. I think, Gordon, you have some really great points to establish around the economics of business teams in general. How do you think about that, tying back into ROI and thinking about application there? We can dive in a bit more there, but I also think this ties in a little bit to how you design your data teams as well. Like I think there's components of how you think about that structure. So a couple topics to jump into under this, but yeah, maybe any points you want to expand upon on the ROI of the economics of it before we dive into the kind of design systems.
Yeah, I mean, the economics of data teams haunts every data team, right? It's actually a really tough topic, and we really should be paying more attention to it. A lot of teams struggle with being services teams, and then they find out that they don't want to be a services team. They're completely responsive. They're not connected to their business function. They don't get a lot of satisfaction out of their work, right? And then people don't know what they're doing anyway. That's an ROI problem right there, right? And that's partly because you don't understand the economics of your team, because it's a hard problem, because most data teams are not taking direct actions that generate either revenue, customer satisfaction, or product satisfaction, right? Like, I've been doing this for a long time. I have yet to run a marketing campaign, right? I've yet to sign up a customer for a product. I have never answered a customer support call. Actually, I have answered a customer support call, but but not as a data person, right? And so we create potential for other people. So how do we tie into their metrics to measure our value? And it's hard. So like every hard problem, we have to start decomposing it. Again, we look at ROI, we think about value over cost. Maybe we push value aside for a second, because because it's so much harder. Let's tackle the easier one. Let's look at cost. Well, with with cloud-based solutions, we have so much more granular costs than we ever had before, right? I mean, back in the day when I had to spec a server and IO subsystem and so on, put it in a server room, I knew the total bill, but I didn't know how it broke down. Now I can see that cost of every single individual query in Snowflake. That's incredibly powerful. So I'm going to figure out how to use that. And in terms of I need to figure out how to attribute those costs, right? So that I need something I can count. So I start thinking, well, that goes back to your definition of product. What is it that you deliver anyway? Do you deliver models? Do you deliver dashboards? Do you deliver reports? What do you deliver? So think about, how do I tie the costs of queries and other actions within Snowflake and other products to the actual product consumed by your end users. If you don't understand that relationship, you're not going to understand cost. You won't be able to attribute. Maybe you could do something like saying, well, all the reports run on this particular warehouse in Snowflake, I'm going to attribute to customer support. Okay, that's a starting place, but it's not very granular, right? You know, it's like, oh, hey, we spent $500,000 on customer support last year. Like good or bad? Oh, you know, how did, and can I change it, right? You need the granularity to have some kind of impact on it. And then on the value side, well, value is, again, as I was saying earlier, is hard, but doesn't mean just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not worth tackling, right? And so I have a cheat for measuring the value for data products. Go ask your users, right? You might not be able to say how many dollars are generated by a dashboard, but you can talk to your users and find out which dashboards are most important to them, which reports are most important to them, which models are most important to them, right? And of course, you can instrument them just like a good SaaS company would, right? Daily active users, anybody, right? Weekly active users, so on and so on. And if you have this information, you could start making asset allocation decisions like, I've got 50 pipelines that are failing at some frequency. Which one should I invest in first to fix? Well, maybe the one that's used every Monday morning by the entire company, right? That's probably good ROI, you know? And then which ones do you choose not to fix maybe? Oh, how about, you know, I won't say the company, but I was at a place once where we had 30,000 looker reports. I can guarantee you that not every one of those reports was worth maintaining, you know? Yep. And in fact, in my first quarter there, we deleted 29,000 of them. Okay. And that was fantastic ROI. Yeah. And I was only able to do that because I had some notion of value here, in this case, measured by user activity, and said these reports deliver no value because no one's using them. In fact, it created negative value, right? Because they kept users from being able to find what they wanted. So economics is critical to all of this, right? And whether you engage in it actively or not, you are using economics.
I think this ties in really well to a theme I'm hearing across a couple of the points. It's you just made that mention of being able to like trace the economics of a query in Snowflake, for example, and we were talking about this a bit before with observability platforms, so just having more granular control. And I think that one of the bigger things I'm seeing around 2023, that this the advent of the modern data stack, and we keep talking to, and these things is really just around this idea of what the ability of automation is making things easier. So like the ability, like it is an automated feature of a managed tool that you can get this insight in a way that would be very difficult before. So as you were talking about why the expectancy of ROI has to be, you know, higher in less time, is because there's more at a facility for us to have controls over what we're doing and measure against user value. And so I think this idea of what observability tools and what, you know, Snowflake and what these managed workflows are doing are giving us just more control over how we think about those pieces to deliver that value downstreams. I think it's a really interesting point to see that like a byproduct of, you know, more the modern tooling comes out as just to the responsibility to have better tracking and better dependency on the efficacy of what the work is and tied into that ROI.
And we're in a very natural place in the life cycle of the modern tool, modern data stack, like any technology or any product. And maybe it's accelerated a little bit because of the macro factors of 2023 and so on. But like in producing anything, any kind of product, there's a swing between value and efficiency, right? So in the beginning, we all try to produce value. We try to produce something new. We have a new product and so on and so on. And then we had to figure out how to make it profitable. And so that's a swing back to efficiency. So with the adoption of dbt and Snowflake and so on and so on, we're all very excited about all the value we're generating. And we got efficiency along the way because frequently we were replacing less efficient tools, right? You know, cloud data warehousing versus your own server room. But with freedom, and there's a tremendous amount of freedom with product, the cloud, comes inefficiency. It's just a natural thing. They go hand in hand, right? You have lots of flexibility, a lot of freedom. Of course, you'll get less efficient. And that efficiency scales up over time. And so now maybe the ROI is driving down the inefficiency. So part of like, you know, we talked about, you know, numerator and denominator before, product over value. I can improve my ROI in two different ways, right? I can either deliver more value, I can lower my costs. And so observability is absolutely critical to both of those things, you know, and sometimes lowering costs is the easier to try to ramp up more value, right? I think that's going to be a very attractive angle in 2023, right? You know, the whole lowering of costs.
makes a ton of sense. Yeah, we're seeing that right now with certainly with a lot of our clients and the companies we work with. It's not there's no less of commitment to what they need as a result, but certainly tighter budgets to get there. And so I think that squeeze is a natural byproduct that's going to be emerging this year with the economy where it is. The other area that I think is crucial, and you talked to this a minute ago about how, domain expertise and being able to understand, ask your users, and being, that in fact you haven't answered a customer success ticket, or maybe you have, but is just about how we design teams to best utilize data consumption. I think that's a huge part about both identifying value, but also the cost utilization and integration. I think it ties in both to these are forever questions about how you design a team. I think the range of centralization versus decentralization that exists. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about what trends you're seeing with the advent of modern data tool and the cyclical nature of solving similar problems in data. But where are we at with the best thinking that you've seen, generally for how team design exists with data, or sort of data team design exists here?
Yeah, I mean, as usual, the answer is depends, and it goes back to your first principles of what problem you're trying to solve. So my wife's PhD, my wife puts stuff in space, right? She works on space hardware, right? And she did quite a bit of time helping modeling the design of spacecraft. And she talks about the notion of static tuning versus dynamic tuning. Static tuning is the tuning you do upfront based on what you already know. Dynamic tuning is capacity you reserve for tuning for when you encounter unknowns, adapting to the situation, right? And so it's the same in terms of building these teams. Do we want to centralize our efforts? Do we want to optimize for certain sort of static situations, or do we want to distribute our capabilities into business units and so on, so that are flexible and adapt to changing environments? Well, the reality is you need both, right? And the answer is, whether centralized versus flexible sort of depends on what you're trying to do. So generally, in terms of cost management, in terms of security, data quality, there's a lot of economy of scale to centralizing a lot of that, right? You don't want every individual business unit to create their own observability tool or buy their own observability tool, right? Nor should they have to. You should be providing that for them if you are a centralized team. You certainly do not want every individual team to have their own security policy. Remember, security is about protecting your customers, right? If you're not protecting your customers, you have no business being in data, right? So we want to take a centralized view for that. But centralized teams, while getting a lot of economy of scale in certain directions, are notoriously slow and inflexible in terms of responding to the subject matter needs of business units, and that's where the embedded analysts come in. Right. And so I really kind of I like this, and I go for a hybrid, right? Because I want my analysts as close to the true subject matter experts as much as possible. But at the same time, I don't want to just embed them and abandon them. It can get kind of lonely, right? When you're the only analyst, or you're the only engineer, or you're the only whatever in a room, it gets kind of lonely. You need a place to go back to. So I kind of think about dividing my team into two groups, and it kind of goes along the line ideas of feature teams and platform teams, where we have these embedded experts who are facilitating other experts, right? The actual subject matter experts. You're embedding technical experts, and then you're supporting them, right? So if you have a centralized team and you need a North Star, here's what I think your North Star should be. Go delight the analysts.
I couldn't agree more. And on the slide, you've been talking beautifully to it, and we pulled up a couple. This is actually, I think you made it down to New Orleans for the Coalesce conference this year. But the Snap Travel team pulled together this talk on this. I think it really nailed it out of the park. You can get that off of the DBT Coalesce website, but this is a couple slides they pulled together, and I think really articulated an incredible case to back up a lot of what you're saying here. But it pulls together, I think, another couple areas that have been made this easier, and some pulling back together. I think why now? Like, we've always been there's been a tug polarity between centralized versus embedded, or the benefits and pros and cons. You can make a case either way, as you gave a few good examples. But some of the tools, like the data security policies and how the ease of sharing data that Snowflake has enabled, or the construct that we have with DBT allowing better standardization about how you're building analytics in that way, so you can have that shared out across organizations to get repeatable, reusable code and version control and lineage and a few of those pieces. You're actually seeing that tooling enable the hybrid to actually work. And there's an idea where you want the pros of each side and you don't want the cons of each side, obviously, but then you oscillate towards one because of whatever is the priority of each of those components of decentralized versus embedded. And I think that is one of the areas that we're seeing now with high controlled like attribute-based data security protocols and really structured lineage and good observability, allowing, and security protocols that are much easier to get more data, secure data control, allow us to then have a more higher functioning hybrid embedded model that you're seeing here. So I think that that I think is a big trend that's going to be occurring in 2023 is more as that analytics engineer rises up and becomes embedded in teams and move maybe across a few, there is going to be much more integration between where those roles used to be more fragmented between centralization in the past.
Yeah, and it's really all a matter of dealing with scale, right? When you have a very small team, let's say you have a company of 3 or 4 people, you just naturally do this. So much of what we're doing is trying to deal with the complexities of trying to scale. It's hard to get people all moving in the same direction. We should share out a link to this. This was a great article this slide is from, and for people who haven't seen it, we should share it out. And then what I love about it is they walk you through the evolution of their teams, and they really bring you along, right? Showing how, these are the pros and cons along at different stages.
Yeah, I agree. This one very valuable. Coming to the tail end of here, which is we're going to open it up for Q&A. Last slide we have is on a couple trends, pretty high level, but talking about a couple of the leading tools and some of those trends. But I believe there's a poll coming up at the end here. Is this correct?
Yes, sir, there is. So we will push that live now.
Great. Pause for a second on that. I'm trying to keep nice and tight to the timeline.
And everyone should have that poll up, so we'd be grateful for your feedback.
Well, the poll data is coming in. I think we'll talk to a couple of trends just to be respectful of the time that we have laid out here. So we'll just jump a couple slides down and I'll read. I think it will tie in nicely to some of the comments on the data structure tools. So just put a couple things up here. I think trends for 2023, there's a lot going on. I think you've a couple things I want to just note. We talked through that are emergent right now. We're seeing a lot of buzz around these big open purpose models like GPT-3 with data as a model, which is a new kind of data as a model. I think it's models as service is, I think, the little typo in there, and a couple of the tools that are leading out. And we didn't want to make this a commercial about any given tools because tools are can be right for some organizations and not for others. But a couple of things that I've seen that I think I'd note too is I think looking at some trend towards next year, just picking up the Snowflake example, they are taking a step out with actually releasing Unistore. I think is one of their big announcements as they're moving into an OLTP database, so transaction layer. I think that ties in. It is an example that is very indicative of what's happening in the modern data tool stack right now around the abstraction of how you interact with what used to be very complex services. And again, going back to that tie and the narrative of automation. So Snowflake has moved heavily into really changing how we do the OLAP environment with analytics, but the idea of stepping into transactions, early days for that, but as soon as the more abstraction of how compute and processing power is tied in, I think it's just very indicative of what's happening in the transition of these data tools, which we're able to move further and further away from bare metal and managing the server and allocating for high compute problems and really just getting to focus on that value layer. And I think that it's just picking one of those things that's getting a lot of buzz, but very much so in the narrative consistent. So Gordon, any questions?
I love
points you see trends.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited by the Unistore announcement too, because in some ways it's just pragmatic and it's almost boring, right? In the sense that it's boring in that it's recognizable, right? So in Snowflake's really great at doing bulk updates and doing bulk reads and so on and so on. But if you understand the internals, you know how incredibly painful updating a single row is, right? Snowflake's built on top of micropartitions, and micropartitions are approximately 20 megabytes in size. So if you change a single row in a micropartition, Snowflake always writes out the entire partition. It's 20 megs, for a 20 byte row, right? That's kind of inefficient. Well, it turns out we have solutions for these things. right? We have technology that's been around for a number of decades that handle single row inserts very, very well. And those are basically relational databases. And so like Unistore, it holds out the promise of being able to get the best of both worlds, right? And then through the abstraction of the data model itself, sitting on top of it, tables and so on. We have fact tables, we have dimension tables. We're like, oh, gee, I would love to put my fact table in a columnar store that's optimized for bulk reads, and I'd love to put my dimension tables, especially those slowly changing dimensions and all those good things, into some kind of relational store so that I'm not paying a ton to keep updating a few million rows, right? And of course, it's going to be way faster, right? So Snowflake's typically going to give you 1 to 200 milliseconds response for like a single partition, but a regular relational database is going to be a lot faster for that single row, right? And that kind of time actually matters when it comes to like interacting with your data. So I think
Perfect. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, good.
I was just going to share the results of the poll because we'd love to hear your last thoughts on these modern data stack tools.
Great. Interesting. Well, as unsurprised, Snowflake is dominant in the force here. We got 64% of our users are taking advantage of that. And even distribution between Power BI is doubling Tableau, which is following trends. There's actually, I know this is a small sample size, but Power BI is really emerging out and it's a strong BI player. dbt is strong contender. Also following trend, Redshift has dropped year over, so very consistent. That's not as much of
Redshift.
I know it's a little, and BigQuery has been emerging too. It's actually very funny from a lot of the trending data. This group is an accurate sample size of a lot of the things we're seeing. So it's very cool to see. It's also one thing I will watch this year is one of the trends for 2023. Databricks is incredibly ambitious with the Lakehouse and a lot of the push they're doing. They've been huge to invest into it. They've also been putting up a big venture arm that's sort of about to snatch up a bunch of people for integration. I think we'll see a lot of activity on the Databricks strategy and just taking what they're doing as an organization. I think is going to be very impactful in the space this year. So.
Yeah, I'm going to put my product manager hat for real quick there and think about it and just look at the contrast between Snowflake and Redshift. Now, I don't know anything about the internals of Redshift in terms of their product strategy and so on and so on, but I'm not going to argue that they have not had the adoption they wanted because they felt like engineers, not product managers. I was fortunate enough to get to know a lot of the people at Snowflake, and one of the things that people like Benoit, one of their CTOs, really embodied was he was trying to solve problems. He had tremendous empathy for the end user. And so when you pick a technology, you should be able to look at your vendors and understand what problem are they trying to solve. And if they aren't trying to solve the problem you care about, I'd be a little skeptical about adopting them.
Yep. I think that's a really great point. I think it ties back. I want to wrap up so we can get some Q&A here, but I think that ties back in so well to how you started out this conversation, which you have a perfect case in point with Snowflake to show that, tying back into when you think about that user problem, thinking about the value you're adding, how you think about the users to get there, that's what really drives the success that you see in the space. And I think that's, Snowflake has embodied that well, and why it's complete in dbt too, and these areas that are really driving to, the adoption of the space is really just working back from driving that value in a measurable way. And I think that's a huge component of what these tools are enabling in 2023. So, Priya, I want to kick over, potentially see if there's a few questions that we can talk to here.
There definitely are. We've got quite a few, so hopefully we can get to all of them. For any questions we don't get to, we will have Gordon and Josh answer them, and then we will send the answers in a follow-up email along with this webinar. So the first question is, how can an organization evaluate their data literacy? How do they decide where they are 1 through 5?
Yeah, I mean,
that's a great question. Go ahead and take it away.
It's a tough one, right? So you can come at it from a tooling perspective, and ask some of those basic things like, do you have data models describing your databases? Do you have a data catalog describing your basic attributes, and so on? But really, I would actually look at it from the other angle, like try to think about, how are my users constrained? If you have Slack, and I assume you have Slack, people are asking all the time, hey, what's the definition of this field? Well, where do I find this? Where do I find that? Right? Those users are blocked. They should not have to ask someone where to find this stuff. So that's an immediate problem. You can start thinking about how to solve that, building tooling to solve that problem. Don't invest in the tooling until you have the problem, right? So look for that. The other thing is, like, again, talk to your end users, right? And understand where are they blocked? Go back to that theory of constraints again, right? If you're talking to finance people, and let's say, and maybe they have a finance degree, but if they're expecting them to write SQL and they don't know SQL, they're blocked, right? If and so, you got to go to the constraints. Anyone who's an analyst is kind of engaging in three basic activities. They're trying to use content, they're trying to create content, and they're trying to find content, right? Knowledge platforms are actually content platforms, right? If your users cannot find content because you have 30,000 reports all the same name, they're blocked. If they can't use content because the performance is really slow, they're blocked. And if they can't create content because your development environment is really slow, or it's not documented, they're blocked, right? So literacy is a way to overcome these constraints. So you look at the constraints and figure out how people are blocked, and then measure how fluent people are against overcoming those constraints.
Yeah, I think that's great. We do a lot of this work with we have a data strategy engagement that we do with a lot of our clients at Blue Orange, and our starting point is trying to assess this exact question. So how are we able to start, because knowing with what our recommendations are very much so predicated on understanding where an organization is in that maturity life cycle or that literacy cycle. And there isn't a perfect science to this, but I do think everything Gordon articulated is data accurate, but even just understanding, the idea of one of those actions you do with governance around stewardship, for example, do you have that group of people you can ask those questions to? Do you understand who the consumer is in that area? I think even starting with the people and the business problems, it's a clear set to then say, okay, talk to the user, but the user about that specific problem. So really start upstream, map it from, we start with org charts in a lot of cases to understand where we hang the business problems to, then the prioritization, and then we get into the data problem. And I think it is somewhat of if that exercise isn't done, then to answer it in a unified way, it really can't be. You can have areas that are really mature in their literacy and areas that are not. And having some mapping of understanding that where those importance are is a really crucial starting point too. So yeah, I think there isn't a perfect science of what is data literate, because it's an evolving system that can always be increased. But I think having at least an ontology of how you can structure the status of it internally is really crucial.
Beautiful. We've got a couple really good ones.
Yeah. Go ahead, Priya.
So are you all right moving on to the next question?
Sure.
Great. The next one is, how can organizations use data observability to identify and troubleshoot issues in real time and then proactively prevent future problems? Yeah,
I mean, you starting with defining what your expectations are, right? Again, so I need to define what a problem is. So a broken pipeline might be a problem. How big of a problem is it? Right? How time critical is that report or that dashboard? If you fix it in 30 minutes, have you met the SLA? Right? So start with your metrics, understand what those things are. And here's a really obvious SLA that a lot of people miss, right? So you may say, hey, all my data is available by 8 a.m. every day, and I must be serving all my business users. Sure, in that time zone, but have you gone international yet? Right? And so a more nuanced SLA there is oh, the data is not delayed more than 24 hours. Right. So have these metrics, understand it, and start thinking about the basic tooling to measure those things. It starts simple. I always write myself my own data warehouse dashboard. Why? Right? Because it helps me, refresh my memory of the tooling. It reminds me how hard it is to do these things, and reinforces my notion as a manager, as an analyst, that I am an analyst also, right? And then it allows me to create the language that we want to talk about this, and it allows me to communicate to my end users. And my end users might be my own team. Hey team, we've got a crisis. Or hey team, everything's great. Don't worry about this. Focus on your regular old user story, right? Help bring you as the analyst are helping build that sort of security and confidence for your own team, right? So I would say start small, figure out the metrics you really need, think about the hierarchy, and work your way down. Don't get bogged down in the minutia up front.
And I think adding on to that, I think just as a tactical or applied here is, there are a lot of tools that are very new, or like you mentioned the list of earlier on, but there's just a lot of tooling that's come out that has really aided considerably to this too. I think this was something that the even term observability has become new in the last few years, because it's a new machination that, again, back to how the tools are automated in uncovering some of those ways to actually triage and analyze the kind of core metrics that are identified when you look at what the goals are. So I think there's the tools that Gordon has mentioned can be very helpful in diagnosing that as well.
The other advice there, and this is where some of the tooling helps you, is like be very cognizant of the amount of effort you put into this, into ROI, right? Again, if you've run a team for a while, you've probably gone through the cycle like, oh, hey, we don't have any testing, we need some testing. Oh, let's write some tests. And all of a sudden you have so many tests generating all this signal that you actually you stop using the tests, right? You know, that one Slack channel that has 200 messages a day, right? Think about what signal do you really need, right? And then tease it out. Again, going back to from the top down as opposed to from the bottom up in terms of measurement.
All right, beautiful. Next question. What are companies getting wrong with respect to organizing data-driven initiatives?
I laugh. I think we've, the companies and ourselves, I'm sure we've been involved in both many problems and many mistakes driven, and let's mention some well-seen great things. So, Gordon, why don't you take this one away?
All right, I'll take this one. It's one of my pet peeves. I'm going to argue that part of it is calling data-driven initiative, right? You know, really, data is an asset to do something else, and when you generate knowledge from it, you can use whatever terms you want. Use knowledge to create insight to get the actions to drive outcomes, right? So really, just like you don't have a math team, you know, you don't have a writing team at your company. You don't even necessarily have a coding team anymore, right? Part of the problem is that we think about these things as data initiatives, as opposed to, you know, making better decisions around some outcome, right? So if it's marketing, I might want to improve the payback period for my SEM campaigns. So, you know, I should be starting there. You know, it's like, hey, what is my desired payback period for a campaign? What is my budget? You know, where are my target areas? How much potential do I have to lift? Determine those terms, and then backing into your initiative, right? I've been on the projects where you spend 2 years building data warehouse. It's a terrible way to do a product, right? Your requirements are stale before you've even delivered the thing. People move on, they change their jobs, right? Instead, I advocate totally going to other steps. Always start with the pain, the business problem, the opportunity, work your way backwards, and do the MVP. You know, don't go get all 5 petabytes. And I've done this, I've made this mistake. Don't get all 5 petabytes of data just because the CTO said to go get that. You know, figure out the problem you need and what's the least amount of data you need to solve that problem, right? So work from the end result backwards.
Yeah, I think in respect of time and that great answer, I have nothing to add there. So
Perfect. I will ask the last question in respect of time, and it is, in the context of initial strokes in trying to use data and derive insights, how do you juggle implementing gold standard architecture while sprinting towards business value and ROI?
Josh, let me take that because I'm going to build on my last answer, right?
Please.
Define what you mean by production, right? I said start from the end, right? So if I'm going to deliver something to you as a user, I should have a notion of what production means. And so I use these 5 pillars, you know, that basically stack up like Maslow's hierarchy of needs for a data platform of security, then quality, then reliability, then user experience, and then coverage. Security means you protect your customers. Quality means you protect yourself from bad data and bad signals, right? You know, reliability means the solution is there when you need it. Usability is that it's a delight to use. Your users don't just struggle with it. And then finally, coverage. Coverage is last, right? I don't want to give you data about a topic where the data is insecure and I'm endangering our customers. I should not do that. I've delivered negative value in that case. So I think in terms of balancing your gold standard versus the need to sprint is define what that gold standard is, get that acceptance that, hey, this is what we mean by production. Are we going to deliver something less than this? Let's do this consciously. Don't let this just happen to us. And if you're going to, and then to balance it with the need to be really agile and deliver very quickly, you're going to have to ask the question around scope, right? If you remember the old iron triangle about time, resources, and requirements, and then quality is the one in the middle that suffers. I'm going to argue quality on the point, the production standard, and put scope in the middle. You're like, hey, we're going to deliver something maybe very, very small, but it meets our standards of production. And if it's too small, maybe we need to have a discussion about what the standards of production is, right? So that's how I think about balancing it.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, I want to be respectful of the time allotted, so just wanted to thank your guest, Gordon. Thank you so much for coming on. Your insights are so insightful and right on hit the nail on the head on kind of alignment of how we think about things. So really appreciate the time. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Josh. And thank you to all that attended. We are so very grateful for your time and patience with us. This webinar will be available on demand should you wish to share it with your colleagues or view it again. Thank you again, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.